Okay, egunon, ongi etorri. Welcome to this seminar on advancing research on protection in the context of humanitarian action, organized by the Human Rights Institute, the Noah Masters at the University of Deusto. I would like to welcome you to this university, especially to those people that come from abroad or from other places. I would like to highlight, I'm going to do a very brief introduction to the seminar because we are a little bit on delay and I would like to apologize for that. But I would like to introduce the rationale that appears in the seminar about protection and why protection and humanitarian action. No? As it says in the rationale in the introduction of the seminar, protection has been identified as the purpose and intended outcome of humanitarian action. It was a point made by the Interagency Standing Committee in 2013 on a statement on the centrality of protection in humanitarian action as part of preparedness efforts, immediate life-saving activities, and throughout the duration of a crisis and beyond. Well, this is the reason why the NOAH faculty at the University of Deusto, in collaboration with the NOAH network, has organized, and also United Against Inhumanity, has organized this seminar in order to discuss some of the perspectives and theories about protection in humanitarian action, both from the theoretical and academical point of view, but also from the practitioner's point of view. No? Try to establish this dialogue between these two sectors that sometimes they look on opposite sides. No? I would like to especially thank Cristina Churruca, my colleague at the Institute, and also the rest of the NOAH faculty at the Institute for organizing the seminar. Joana, Abrisketa, who is on my left side, Kike, Guren, Patricia, Maite, and so on. I will not go on the structure of the seminar because I think you have it in the folders, but I would like to finish with 3 micro stories, we say it in Spanish, microrelatos, from a book that was presented yesterday from somebody that has been working in different humanitarian or conflict scenarios such as Palestine, Congo, and Colombia, who has been living there the last 5 years, and he recovered different experiences that he has reflected both at the academic space and also in conflict scenarios with victims of conflict. And he presented yesterday this book, which title is Horas de Guerra, Minutos de Paz, Hours of War, Minutes of Peace. And I think that these 3 micro stories go a little bit in line with the aim of the seminar, and I hope that they will also give some insight for the reflection of today and for tomorrow. They are in Spanish. I don't know if Nora, Antonio, or the other people might understand, because I mean I knew that there was translation, but well, okay. Yeah, I don't know. Otherwise, I will tell you later. So the first one says, Padre, tenga cuidado. Han minado la vereda. Lo sé, hijo. Por eso nos toca memorizar los pasos. A second one. This directly interconnects us, the academics, with the victims, no? And also the students, no? The people that are going to go later on to do the humanitarian work. Profe, me han amenazado porque colaboro con un diario en el que he contado lo que usted un día nos dijo en clase, que hay lugares en el mundo donde no se mata ni desplaza a la gente para quedarse con sus casas y tierras. And the last one. On these issues we have an expert here, Joana, on Humanitarian International Law. Usted no puede estar aquí, me dijo el capitán al que acompañaban varios soldados armados hasta los dientes. Señor, con todos mis respetos, estamos aquí para proteger los derechos de la comunidad y usted está, con este operativo, poniendo en peligro sus vidas. Por eso le digo, respondió el militar. Well, 3 micro stories that I think that go directly into our day-to-day work, no? Especially of the practitioners, but also of us, the researchers and academics, and the role that we play in all this. I hope these words of the victims in Colombia, or people that are working in spaces where protection is needed, and most of you are familiar with, no? Words that have been taken into this world by Emilio Polo. I think that, I hope that they are useful for the dialogue and the debate of today and tomorrow. Thank you, and I give the floor to Joana to continue with this first session. Okay.
Buenos días a todos y a todas. I will speak in Spanish, if you don't mind. En primer lugar, muchas gracias, Gorka, por tu presentación, por tu delicada presentación y poética presentación, que no revela ninguna fantasía, sino que es pura realidad, los 3 hechos que nos has trasladado a través de los 3 versos. Voy a pasar directamente y sin más dilación a presentar a las 3 ponentes de esta primera parte, que se llama Setting the Scene on Protection in Humanitarian Contexts, estableciendo, poniendo la escena, en escena, la protección en los contextos humanitarios. La primera ponente es Norah Niland, y su ponencia en concreto se titula Challenges and Opportunities for Protection in the Context of Humanitarian Action. Norah Niland ha dedicado gran parte de su actividad profesional a trabajar en Naciones Unidas, tanto en el terreno como en la sede. Ha trabajado en Sri Lanka, en Tailandia, en Camboya, en Liberia y en Afganistán. Y su tarea quizás más significativa es la tarea que desarrolló en Afganistán como directora de Derechos Humanos, Human Rights Director, en la operación de Naciones Unidas en Afganistán que se llamaba UNAMA, y al mismo tiempo representante del Alto Comisionado de Naciones Unidas para Derechos Humanos dentro de dicha operación, lo que me imagino que nos contará con detalle porque tiene mucho significado, ¿no? Seguramente podrá aportar experiencias tanto positivas como negativas y podrá mostrar cuáles son las oportunidades y los desafíos, los challenges, como se menciona en el título. Antes de haber llevado a cabo esta operación, esta tarea dentro de la operación de Naciones Unidas en Afganistán, estuvo encargada de la política de desarrollo en OCHA, lo que también es otro desafío. Política de desarrollo en OCHA, en Ginebra, y en 2003 Niland dedicó un año sabático a lo que se llama la Human Security, a la seguridad humana, precisamente en el Human Security Institute en Tufts University en Boston, como Visiting Research Fellow. So, thank you so much, Norah, for being here. It's your floor. Mejor que vaya presentando a cada una de las ponentes, si os parece, y luego, en lugar de presentarnos a todos a la vez, para que no nos liemos, ¿de acuerdo? Gracias. Thank you, Norah.
Good morning, buenos días. I'm afraid I'm going to do this in English. But first I want to thank Cristina and Kike and Noah faculty colleagues for organizing this seminar that I'm very, very interested in. And looking forward to a vigorous discussion. Sorry, is that okay like that? Yeah. Okay. Looks okay. As Joana already explained, I have mostly worked in or on conflict situations. So protection is close to my heart. It's a topic that I've been long concerned with. My first formal humanitarian assignment was on the Thai-Cambodian border back in the 1980s. And an important, and one of the most important lessons I learned there and then was understanding what are the issues of greatest concern to people facing multiple risks. And we can discuss this later this morning. But this is why I'm a bit dispirited when I look at the overall humanitarian apparatus today. The notion, for example, that in Syria, child-friendly spaces somehow take precedence over challenging or trying to push back against the reality of the kind of warfare that people are subjected to. But it's also why I'm pleased to be in this seminar that is concerned with advancing research and reflections on improving the ability of humanitarians, whether as practitioners or as academics, to be more protective. So what I planned to do, I think I have about 20 minutes. What I plan to do is to look at some big picture issues in terms of giving an overall context, and then looking at a number, obviously not all, protection problems. What are the opportunities to change the situation that I have concluded needs to be changed, and then a few concluding comments. So in terms of the overall context, big picture issues, I think it's not news when I say that we live in an era of rapid and turbulent change. Social, political, economic, cultural, and geopolitical change across the global landscape. We see that there's ongoing significant power shifts from west to the east, and that means lots of uncertainty. We live in and die in an era of unruly international relations and a la carte multilateralism that quite often makes the Security Council redundant. This, of course, is coupled with globalization forces, and globalization has good and negative aspects, but often it puts in question the authority and agency of states to deliver on their responsibilities. And these trends represent important challenges to humanitarians, human rights, and other folk, given that these norms underpin the international rule-based order that we have benefited from since the end of World War II. Another important trend, again, it's not news, is growing inequality everywhere. And of course, such inequality is often the source and exacerbates marginalization, discriminalization, and political instability. Earlier this year, the NGO Oxfam noted that 42 individuals, we're talking about the world, but 42 individuals hold as much wealth as 3.7 billion people who make up the poorest 50% of the world's population. So, you know, whether it's governance structures that are democratic or otherwise are not delivering in the eyes of many. We have just seen in elections recently, whether it's in Italy or yesterday in the United States, the way in which trends are operating. But this disenchantment with our government and our governance structures has also seen the rise of xenophobia, and some also worry about the recurrence of fascism here in Europe. In the European Union, of course, a common denominator in political discourse is the issue of migration. For some of us, it's a good idea. People have always been on the move. But for others, it is being transformed into a them and us problem. Indeed, while some talk about a refugee crisis, it is really here in Europe, but not only a crisis of our values. Other trends that are of concern, or should be of concern, is warfare. Trends are up. There was a dip after the 1990s, but now warfare trends are up, and the number of people affected. A month ago, Peter Moore, the president of ICRC, said that 2 billion people suffer from armed conflict and fragility. And then something like 70 million people, again a figure that we're familiar with now, were displaced, were uprooted from their homes last year, 2017, as a result of violence. Other people, of course, are uprooted as a result of disasters and other phenomena. A former MSF worker, now a professor, Séverine Otesser, said recently in an article in the Washington Post that battle deaths have risen by 340% globally, 340% globally in this past 10 years. A significant factor in this is the global war on terror, which has unleashed an avalanche of unregulated warfare. And as this conference, this seminar is about protection, that of course is of major concern. Other disruptive global trends include climate change, again, a topic that we're all very familiar with. And we know that it will produce more disasters, and that many of these are going to be catastrophic, and especially when they occur in war zones. We've seen this routinely, for example, in Afghanistan, a country that has been in war now for more than 40 years. But it's not unique to Afghanistan, unfortunately. Also Somalia, South Sudan, etc. So these trends, point to a lethal convergence of threats that pose questions about organized humanitarianism. And this is particularly the case from my perspective on the protection front. To a large extent, and I've been a long-time humanitarian, and I remain a humanitarian at heart and still do some humanitarian work, but for the formal humanitarian system has shown itself resistant to change. There's been multiple efforts to try to reform, make the system or the apparatus, because some say there isn't a system, more effective. But to a large extent, these have not delivered. First speaker talked about the centrality of protection that was adopted a few years ago, 2013, if I get the dates correctly. But from the research I've undertaken and from my contacts with the humanitarian community, there is very little evidence of meaningful change. Some things, small things have changed, things have been tweaked and stuff, but in terms of meaningful difference, in contrast to the world in which we live in, it is difficult to find that evidence. So this is the background against which I have identified, I said a few, not all, of the protection problems that I think may be of interest for us to discuss over the next 2 days. And I'm going to start by saying that there are two types of protection problems. There are protection problems that, to a significant extent, and I'm talking about war zones, have always existed, but not only in war zones. There's the problem of violence, coercion, discrimination, sexual abuse, and undignified living conditions and policies that erode or delete means of survival. That's one set of protection problems. The other problems is the extent to which, that I flagged a moment ago, the extent to which the humanitarian architecture is not fit for purpose, and that's not a unique perspective. Both the architecture and the attitudes of the agencies that constitute the humanitarian system have been, as I just said, reluctant to entertain change that is needed. And when I'm talking about architecture, I'm talking about interagency mechanisms that are there. For example, the Interagency Standing Committee that was generated in 1991, I guess, after the first Iraq War, to bring more coherence and more effectiveness. And I say coherence, greater reduction of gaps, more coherence within the formal apparatus. And back, I guess it was in the mid-90s, Jan Egeland, who was then the Emergency Relief Coordinator, also put in motion a system of steps to try to bring greater coherence to that. And Jan Egeland has himself, he still is actually until the end of this month, the humanitarian advisor senior humanitarian advisor in Syria. But he has said repeatedly that his effort of humanitarian reform in the mid-90s, no, it wasn't in the mid-90s, it was 2004, 10 years later, hasn't delivered in terms of protection. It has delivered in terms of greater predictability and early warning, which is also super important. But in terms of protection, he has also said that we as humanitarians are lacking. And the issues that have come to the fore in all of these discussions up to now is the lack of leadership. And of course, there's always people in positions of leadership, but the question here is lack of leadership in terms of that is required, as well as what I call supply-driven protection, which we can discuss later this morning. But basically what it means is that there is a tendency to prioritize what I also call photogenic stuff, which whether that's playgrounds, it's not to deny the need for playgrounds, or training courses, etc. And that takes precedence over the types of initiatives and efforts that are needed to actually change facts on the ground if we're talking about improving the safety and dignity of people at risk. Other problems include the triple role of UNHCR, which is in the lead on protection. It operates as a coordinator, donor, and implementing agency. Its stance on protection that includes the prioritization of status over needs has also been questioned, in my view, rightly so. And then there's the reality of the two response frameworks. I talked about the Interagency Standing Committee that brings together agencies working inside war zones, for example, and then there is also the refugee framework, which operates once people have crossed an international border. But having these two frameworks, which doesn't in any way deny the importance of the rights to seek and avail of protection once crossing a border, is that it has contributed, it's not the only factor, but it's contributed to competition for profile and for funds. And research shows that it's contributed to numerous protection failures, from Sri Lanka to Syria, from South Sudan to Myanmar, and of course in the Mediterranean. And according to the whole of system review, this was a study commissioned by the Interagency Standing Committee, I guess 2014, and in which I participated. These problems persist because of vested interests and long-standing institutional agendas, such as funding and donor preoccupations. This, of course, is not to deny that lots of important work does happen, and this is good. And it is also good, of course, that since we're here, we're also looking at research agendas. It is also good that huge efforts have been invested, for example, after the crisis of the early 90s in the Balkans and then genocide in Rwanda, when lots of initiatives, including on greater accountability and learning, were put forward. I think Neil is not here, but he will be joining us later from ALNAP, based in London. But while all of that is good, it is not good, however, that the humanitarian industry is seemingly incapable of taking its protection problems seriously. And some of the most acute problems that are persistent that I have identified is that there is need to change attitudes to addressing the most acute threats to life, that these are prioritized. The deliberate destruction of healthcare facilities, as we've seen, has been the norm in Syria, is a problem, but to a large extent is significantly ignored by the humanitarian community. Humanitarians need to be routinely challenged what has also been a problem in Syria, but not only, as starve or surrender policies. And humanitarians, as we're seeing now in Yemen, should not be complicit with policies that, whereas on the one hand, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia has donated, it's the biggest donor in Yemen, and at the same time, Saudi Arabia and its allies are providing arms to bomb Syrians, to bomb Yemenis, as well as vital infrastructure that is essential for the import of food and other items essential for survival. And an item I'm only going to flag, because I know I don't have a huge amount of time, is sexual abuse. From the early beginning of this century, there was a lot of work put into, and I'm talking also about prevention of sexual abuse and exploitation within humanitarian outfits. And we've seen a few months ago, and of course it hasn't gone away, the problem persists, is the extent to which zero tolerance policies have not delivered. So we can come back to this in the question and answer period, and also, for example, discuss how it is that the problems that were lent after Biafra, that happened 50 years ago, and then more recently after Rwanda, why we as humanitarians are not better able to apply them. So quickly, in terms of protection opportunities, well, obviously it's important to apply the lessons that we have learned. And lessons have been learned. The difficulty is not so much in identifying them, but applying them. And this, of course, also means research and evaluation that is meaningful. The Rwandan genocide gave forth to a lot of, rightly so, accountability, but my impression now is that a lot of that is a box-ticking exercise. I think other opportunities that are important is that there's been a lot of work, rightly so, done on localization, but I would say we have to go local, but we also have to go global. There's a lot that can and must be done at the ground level, but a lot of these problems, whether we're talking about Syria or Central African Republic, Democratic Republic, Afghanistan, also have links to the wider world and processes of globalization. The protection of centrality doctrine, much of it is about do no harm, and of course that's absolutely vital. It's basically that we as humanitarians are not causing harm to others, and obviously that's super important. But I'm arguing that that cannot be a substitute for biting into the problems that put lives at imminent risk. I've already talked about changing the architecture, so I won't go there, because then I'm just going to make a few comments, if I may, concluding comments. I have time. Okay, sorry. So it's just 3-4 concluding comments. That's, and since we're sitting in a university, and part of this seminar is about research and evaluation. So I'm arguing that we need to rethink what is meant by effective humanitarianism. And this is an important task for researchers. I guess we will discuss this more tomorrow, but if research, I mean, it's knowledge, for the sake of knowledge, is important, but when we're talking about humanitarian business, I would say that we need research that actually helps those on the front line, as well as those, of course, who are directly affected, are better able to hold on to their lives. that the current architecture, I know this is a long shot, but that the existing architecture has found to be inadequate and dysfunctional quite often. The whole of system review talked about a whole of caseload approach, so that, for example, in Syria, that you're dealing with the humanitarian community was trying to provide support for people from inside the country, and then there was also, took a lot of time to put it in place, cross-border program, but that was totally disconnected from Syrians and others, including Palestinians when I say others, Syrians and others who fled Syria to seek asylum in neighboring countries and here in Europe. So one approach is that there is a whole of caseload approach, because in 2015, when Syrians, but not only also Afghans and others, ended up on these dinghies trying to cross the Mediterranean, there was absolutely no reference to what was going on in the Middle East, where the bulk of the refugees were, as well as Turkey. But the humanitarian community was basically, to a large extent, absent from those islands on which people were landing. So here the idea is that the humanitarians pursue a whole of caseload approach. I'm also arguing that humanitarians challenge systematically and strategically harmful practices that deliberately cause or exacerbate suffering. And I know I've flagged Syria and Yemen a lot already this morning, but they're the examples that most easily come to mind and illustrate the extent to which the Assad regime, for example, I mean, all warring parties, obviously in Syria, and in all other war zones for that matter, have responsibilities to safeguard and protect the life of civilians. But what we have seen in Syria, that the Assad regime, its policy, it was not incidental, in other words, the deliberate destruction of the healthcare infrastructure and healthcare personnel and patients. It was a strategic decision of the regime to do that, as it was to besiege places and then oblige people to starve or surrender. We're seeing something similar, but if of a different nature, in Yemen. The other concluding comment I have, just two more, is that it's important that humanitarians, and a lot has been written about this, it's not a new idea, it needs to desist, it needs to stop being complicit with harmful policies and practices, some of those of which I've just referred to in Syria and Yemen. And that, again, in recent times, there's been more attention to the importance of humanitarians being accountable to affected communities, and that remains important, but it needs to be taken more seriously. And then last but not least, it's important that research agendas are relevant and are of direct value to those in frontline situations. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Norah, for your conference. You have given us two dimensions of the humanitarian context. One would be the more general or an overall view regarding violence and coercion, discrimination and inequality, which is very often both the cause and the consequence of the humanitarian context. And then you have focused on a more specific dimension, which is the humanitarian architecture, the institutional dimension, in which you find a lack of leadership as regards safety. You have called us for changing attitudes and protection opportunities in order to build a more effective humanitarian protection. And I would like to mention that it has been very appealing to me, the mention of the Biafra conflict 50 years ago and Rwanda 25 years ago, and the little change we have found in this period. So I would like to ask you for this process or evolution during the debate. Well, now I have to present or introduce to you to my colleague and friend, dear friend, Cristina Churruca. Everybody knows her, so it's quite, strange to introduce to you this such a wonderful friend I have here in my left. Cristina is a professor of international relations at the University of Deusto. She is also the director of the NOAA program 12 years ago, more or less, or no, not 12, 9 years ago, I think.
Too many.
Too many years ago. And well, she's the leader in our reference in humanitarian affairs, not only in our university, but I would say in Geneva and in the humanitarian context in general, including Brussels, of course. So thank you so much, Cristina, for your participation here.
While Maite is opening the presentation, I have to thank Joana, and I think it was an exaggeration. Yeah, most of her comments, but I appreciate because I know they come from your heart, and I thank you very much. But I'm just in the process of learning still about things in humanitarian action. As Joana mentioned, I'm coming from international relations, and I always have difficulties many times in understanding how humanitarian action has become part of the international agenda and how issues, and this is how I want to frame my presentation. So I would like to start with some general considerations, yeah, and linking that with some of the comments that Norah did, and then mentioning which is the EU migration policy and the tools, and how the European migration policy has developed into manage a control policy, a border management that has an increased impact in the human rights of people who are in the move, yeah? Not only in the origin, but in transit and people that are arriving at the European Union. And I think one of the issues that is coming more and more is the question of seeing the situation, the humanitarian, the protection needs of people in the move as a new normal, yeah? And this is considered by the European Union now, migration pressures as the new normal, and being considered as, and where we find new places or spaces of deep protection, yeah, or lack of protection. And in terms of considerations, I would like to see which is the link, yeah, of the way we treat migration with transformations that you mentioned, with regard with global social and political transformations due to globalization processes, but also within the international system. And these are linked, and I don't want to go into that, but we can discuss that, to socioeconomic transformations, but also transformation in the structure and geopolitics of power, and also the growing prominence of non-state actors. These, which are trends in international relations, explain why migration is an issue now also in the agenda. And it is linked also to debates and policy discussions that are coming, I will say, fundamentally with the end of the Cold War. We see that the displacement of people are considered not only as a humanitarian, as a human rights imperative, but also as a national and international security problem, yeah? So there is an intention of rich states and international agencies to contain the movement of people across borders with a rhetoric of protection, yeah? So we protect you, but we want you to stay, yeah? And I think the increase of international displaced persons and the decrease of refugees is a consequence of these policies of containment. But also the criticism of these policies and the instrumentalization of humanitarian action, I think sometimes have obscured or relegated the problem of the deep protection, of the lack of protection of forced displaced people. And I use the term forced displaced people on purpose because we have what Alexander Betts is calling survival migrants, yeah? It's people who are fleeing from their countries or leaving their countries because a situation, as you mentioned, of lack of livelihoods, impoverishment, a situation of conflictivity, which made people or pushed people to move. And the way I think we are addressing these questions has to do with concerns, yeah, as I mentioned, that begin with the end of the Cold War and are also linked to the idea of the reconsideration of sovereignty as responsibility and the emergence of concepts of human security and the protection and protection based in human rights, yeah, in rights. So these concerns are framed in a normative, within normative changes which have occurred in the sovereignty regime and the ideas of non-intervention and the emergence of ideas of human rights. So I think the response to problems of forced migration reflects tensions, in fact, in the international system, between the principles of order and principles more of human rights, and which are, in fact, ideas of protection. So this is, like it or not, also linked with failures in conflict prevention, the ideas of peace building and sustainable peace, which migration, in fact, forced migration are a consequence. And I found an interesting lecture of Sadako Ogata in 1992, and it's called Refugees: A Multilateral Response to Humanitarian Crisis. And it was the Elber Lecture in International Studies in the University of Berkeley. And she said that she was convinced that in the post-Cold War has to reach a new order. The problem of displacement must be addressed effectively and humanely. And 30 years later, the problem of displacement is still not addressed, is addressed in a very ineffective way and in a very inhuman way. And the European Union is an example, And we thought it's important to address the question of the European Union because it's been a pioneer in the organization of a toolbox that has as an end, as an objective, the idea of detaining, trying to detain people to come into Europe, and in the end having a lot of human rights effects. So in the case of the European Union, something is not considered is that the question of the control of migration is very much linked with the integration process. The internal migration policy has always seen and perceived migrants and refugees as a threat, even migrants for European member states. Is the idea that there is a restrictive migration policy that we see internally and it's going to have an effect externally. And this is built as a social construction of migration as a security issue. These ideas of securitization, that we have seen now, not only the European Union, but also we see in Australia, in the United States, and which externally is in the end the externalization of European borders. So it's border control and externalization of borders. So we are moving the responsibility out from the European Union to those partner states that we, in terms of solidarity, we are asking them to contain the migration for us, and we are creating spaces of the protection in our own borders. In Spain, we have the case of Ceuta and Melilla, we have Greece, but we also have these hot spots where migrants are being detained, and you have the case a month ago with, I think, over almost 150 people were sent back to Morocco within 1 day. So the idea of refoulement is there, so this consequence. So let's go to the European migration policy. We have, in the last 12 years, we see a development and evolution of a policy that has as an objective migration control and border management. It's a very reactive policy. It's been developed as a reaction to different questions. In 2005, the global approach to migration, which is called the GAM, is the response to some migrants being killed in the border of Melilla and a report of the European Commission. 2011, the global approach to migration and mobility, the GAM, now we have mobility, is the response to the migrant flows and refugee flows coming from the Arab Spring. And the 2015 European Agenda on Migration is the response to this so-called migration crisis, which I don't need to tell you that it's not, you know perfectly this is not a crisis. You know, the number of migrants that are arriving that we have in the European Union is around 3% of the population of the European Union. It's ridiculous. But we are framing this as a survival problem for the European Union. And in fact, what it's showing is that the European Union is not up to its values and for what is considered to be the European Union. So what is worrying is that the European Union is being considered a pioneer, yeah, in developing a very comprehensive and balanced approach to address migration. It's very sophisticated because it's thought in terms of partnership, yeah? So we have, and we see that now, since 2005, the idea of human rights is being introduced. There were critics to the European Union because the consideration of the protection of human rights was not included in the policy. So now it's thought to be migrant-centered, and the protection of human rights is one of the main objectives. But the main objective is the security is to secure our borders and to impede that migrants come to the European Union. So this is, if we look at this comprehensive, yeah, it's what is called the comprehensive approach of migration, is made of different areas. So we are trying to address root causes of irregular migration through different long-term policies. There are country-based partnerships. I will go in detail a bit into that. We are saying that we are promoting international humanitarian law. We are developing new instruments. There is better coordination, apparently, between the European Union and member states. But you know that what the main characteristic of the EU migration policy is lack of solidarity internally. So unilateral responses, yeah, and leaving up to border states the whole burden of migration, and then doing bilateral deals with different partner countries. So it's a policy mix, yeah, of policy negative incentives, and one of the main focuses is going to be in readmission and reintegration. We are sending back through very sophisticated agreements those people that are arriving to the European Union. So which are the main objectives? So the main objectives are reducing the incentives of irregular migration, and the incentives means that we are going to make the life very difficult to those who are arriving. So we are dismantling smuggling and trafficking networks, but in fact we are, together with saving lives and securing external borders, but saving lives is framed in the idea of we save lives, not allowing and criminalizing different operations in the Mediterranean. So, and Arantxa later on will discuss this, mainly this part. Strengthen the common asylum policy, which is not, still not happening, and Joana knows that very well, and developing a new policy on legal migration, which is also starting. So what does it mean in practice? Yeah? So these ideas of reducing, what does it mean in practice? Protecting our borders. What we are doing is securing our borders. We are going, in the next years, there is going to be an increase of around 1,500 border guards, yeah, into the different borders. We are trying to help member states, Greece, Italy, Bulgaria, and Spain, yeah, to control better our borders. And this means that we are going to spend in the next years 18 billion, yeah, from the budget in securing the borders. Securing the borders means not letting people come into the European Union. Stopping irregular migration. Stopping irregular migration means that we are reducing, and the European Union, I think we are being very successful in reducing the number of arrivals. And we are reducing the number of arrivals because we are making it impossible for people to arrive to the European Union. So we are even below pre-crisis years, and we still see in the media that we have a crisis of migration. Yeah? So we see that the Eastern Mediterranean route is almost inexistent. The Central Mediterranean route, due to the joint work, yeah, with Italy, Libya, and Niger, and we can come into detail with that. So we are doing capacity building. We are paying these countries to stop migration to come. So this migration route is really reducing, and the Western Mediterranean route is still increasing because the pressure being in Central and the Eastern Mediterranean route is putting pressure in the Western Mediterranean. This means the Spanish border. The Spanish border is seeing an increase of 2,000 arrivals in all per week. Yeah? So that's really a question. And we have to say that we put a lot of attention in these Mediterranean routes, but what is out of sight is the people not only that are stranded in Libya, but those people who have been expelled to the desert from Algeria and Morocco by the Moroccan and Algerian authorities. There are some reports saying that there are more people dying in the desert in sub-Saharan Africa than the people that are dying in the Mediterranean, which is not saying that there is not important. So if we look to numbers, we really see that we don't have a problem, yeah? We look, okay, there is a need to manage migration, yeah, but not migration in the way we are doing, not to manage it in the way we are doing it. So if you look to numbers, we see, yes, in 2015, where we had this so-called crisis, yeah, there was an increase, a huge increase in the number of arrivals, but then we see a progressive decrease, a huge decrease in 2016, 2017, and 2018. This does not mean that we are not going to have an increase. Yeah, there are also reports saying that by 2050, Africa will double its demography. So we have to think, yeah, in how to approach these questions. Saving life at sea. Well, according to EU sources, we are helping and saving the lives at seas, and we are doing that trying to stop traffickers and removing different vessels in the Mediterranean. And I think we are impeding the work of different organizations that try to rescue and save lives of migrants. And what is, I would say, really worrying is the use of humanitarian terms by the European Union to avoid saving lives. Yeah? They are saying that they are stopping these rescue and save lives missions to avoid the smuggling and the trafficking of human beings. So there is a misuse of humanitarian terms for the sake of detention, of securing borders. But if we look to what the Missing Lives Project says, we already have a record of 2,000 people dying in the Mediterranean in the last months, and this is probably not a very low number. Yeah, so this is not a real. This is what they have counted with different reports, but probably the number is much, much higher. Then we have this term, showing solidarity. What does showing solidarity means? And I'm using the terms of the European Commission. Showing solidarity means that, yes, we are mobilizing additional funds to help member states. We are, there is no agreement, as you know, among the European states to share the burden of the common asylum and migration. So the idea, there is a mobilization of funds to help those states who are having the burden. But then there have been hot stops have been set up, yeah? And in theory, these are for people being properly registered and being finger-trimmed and knowing who is coming. But in fact, hotspots are becoming places of no rights. Yeah, places where the Refugee Convention is not being followed and where people are being sent back. Yeah, if there is a readmission agreement, people are directly being sent back to their origin state. And reallocation, as you know, is being quite ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, I think we have not been successful. I can't remember now the number, but I don't think we have even reallocated more than 2,000 people within all the European Union. Showing solidarity, and this is what is a source of concern, is that to reduce the incentive of irregular migrants, yeah, but also even possible asylum seekers to come, we are developing innovative funding solutions. Innovative funding solutions means that we are developing trust funds with different regions. We have a trust fund for Africa. We have also an external investment plan for Africa, the facility for refugees in Turkey, where we are paying Turkey for hosting the refugees that wanted to come to the European Union, the trust fund for Syria, Jordan, with Lebanon, Syria, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. If we look to where it goes, the Trust Fund for Africa is supporting projects in all these different countries, with the idea of developing the economy and avoiding, with the aim, with the last aim of stopping irregular migration. There is no evidence-based research saying that development is going to stop migration. In fact, there are some reports saying that when there is more development, people want to move. So not necessarily this idea of is going to work. And the question is that most of the projects that are being financed have as a focus securing borders in these countries and controlling the flow of migration. So I would say a perverse effect of European policies is also that movement of people across borders that was very common in Africa is now being more and more controlled. And return and readmission. You probably have heard about all this network of readmission agreements. We have 17 readmission agreements with different countries. It means that when there is a readmission agreement, people can be sent directly back. And we have readmission agreements with places like, here we have Cape Verde, but the ones that are being now agreed is with Afghanistan, Guinea, Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Gambia, the Ivory Coast. Well, you know that many of the refugees arriving, or people that are seeking refugee, are coming from Afghanistan and Ethiopia. And part of the return of readmission is what is considered a successful cooperation with the African Union. Yeah, there is with the African Union and the United Nations Task Force. There are people, these stranded migrants, so people who have not been allowed to move, who are stranded in Libya, have been evacuated to Niger. Others are considered voluntary returns, but there are some reports that are really questioning to which extent these voluntary returns were really voluntary, or the returns were because the human rights situation in Libya was unbearable. And we are trying to accelerate resettlement and through an emergency transit mechanism, which is going to be funded by another 17 million. So what we see is that what we are is really creating a network of tools with the objective of stopping, detaining people from coming, and is creating really human rights abuses. Because what we have is that with the idea of combating trafficking, I mean, avoiding people to come legally to the European Union, what we are doing is promoting trafficking and smuggling of people. We are criminalizing humanitarian actors and criminalizing migrants. And I think one of the main questions of concern is that the objective of protecting human rights is not followed by any human rights monitoring or mechanism. Yeah, the European Union is taking for granted that with developing these policies, we are protecting human rights. But all the reports coming from NGOs and from different organizations, including the IOM and UNCHR, are saying that in fact what the European Union is putting in place is an inhuman policy, yeah, that is really affecting human rights of people. So I think this is where I wanted to end, yeah? So in fact, it's an externalization of border control, yeah, an externalization of European policy, which is putting the responsibility on the countries that are partners of the European Union. And we don't have any control of what is happening outside our borders. And even we are creating, as I mentioned, spaces of the protection, yeah? Ceuta and Melilla, and we know Melilla, and you will go, some of you will go probably this year. In Melilla is a place where human rights are violated every day, where people are discriminated according to nationalities, where you can be you are sent back from one day to the next, and where human rights are really, human rights of people in the move, yeah, and in general are really being questioned. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cristina. You have offered us a very critical perspective of the European migration policies, which are focused mainly on the message of protection and security. And for me, the question is, what does the word protection mean as regards migration policies? Does it mean protecting them when they come, protecting them when they are moving, or protecting them when they are in the state of origin? So where is the word protection in the migration policies you have described, such as the trust funds, the readmission agreements, the externalization instruments? So when the reality is that they are not being protected, and this we can see almost every day, when the asylum seekers disappear in the sea, and this is what we are going to talk about in the following conference, when they are killed in the borders, Italian, Spanish, and Greek borders particularly or mainly. Thank you so much, and what we need is protection in these tools. This would be my conclusion, which does not appear, including in the European migration agenda. So this being said, we are going to introduce to you the third member of the table, even if she's not here. She is Arantxa Gurtubay. She holds a bachelor degree in political sciences and a master's in international affairs from Sciences Po at the University of Paris. She has worked in programs for several NGOs at headquarters and in the field offices, specifically in Central America and in the border between Colombia and Ecuador, in which she has worked with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. She is now working since July 2018 as responsible for projects and funding of Open Arms, humanitarian NGO, which has rescued, as you know, more than 60,000 people in the Mediterranean. Open Arms is now preparing to expand its scope of action to go to migrants' countries, to the countries of origin, and then to inform them about their rights and their capabilities. So, Arantxa, thank you so much for being here. You have a lot of things to say. So, welcome to Deusto, even in a fictitious way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to know if you can hear me well. Important to know if you're listening to what I say.
Maybe.
No me oís. Vale. Vale, porque yo sí. Vale, sí. Vale, se me oye. Perfecto, importante. A lo mejor es el inglés que se para de pronto. So, even if my presentation is in English, in Spanish, sorry, knowing that there are people around that might not speak Spanish, I will just make the presentation PowerPoint in Spanish, but I will make the presentation in English if this is okay for you, if you can listen to me. I see Cristina, and I am not sure that you are really listening to what I am saying. Ah, great. Thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting Open Arms to this workshop. I am really sorry for you to have to see me in this first, like in this angle. I'm really sorry. I will do my best not to deceive you. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Norah and Cristina, because I think that this presentation of Open Arms comes very accurately after your presentation. Indeed, I think two main points that I would like to underline and that are very linked to what Open Arms is doing is what Cristina was saying about the fact that the European Union is really trying to make migrant lives difficult, making their lives very difficult. But what is very interesting, and Cristina also pointed this out, is that the European Union is also trying to make the work of those trying to help those migrants, our work is also becoming very difficult. So it's not only about trying to help those who need our help, migrants, refugees, or people on the move, as we want to tell their story, but also they are trying to criminalize us just because we are trying to help. So there is a double disprotection, I would say, not only the disprotection of migrants, also the total lack of protection of those who are trying to help. So this is the first point I would really like to underline, is that we are currently living in the European Union two kinds of disprotection. And there are, one is for those who come from outside, and the other one is really the disprotection of those who are EU citizens. So this is something that needs to be thought around. And the other point that Norah was pointing out about the fact that we are living in a time of change also explains why Open Arms exists. Very interestingly, in this moment of change, and we can see this in Brazil, we can see this in the United States, this uncertainty makes people very vulnerable. And as soon as we see a response to these changing times, they go for it. The good and bad thing is that in this identity crisis, the bad thing is this identity crisis is leading to dictators or authoritarian governments, the case of the United States, but also it implies that people are also looking for responses. And Open Arms, as an organization of the civil society that was born out of nowhere, and now I will explain how it was born, this is another response. So people are supporting our organization in a very, very like astonishing way. It's really incredible. As Mike said before, I worked in UNHCR and I worked in other NGOs in the past. I have never seen what I am seeing right now in Open Arms, which is solidarity every single day, every single minute. People writing messages to us, writing letters to us, because Open Arms is really a response to in these times of change. So I think the bad part of this identity crisis is that we can fall into voting for far-right governments, like happened in Hungary, what is happening in other countries in Europe, in Sweden. They were the second biggest party in the last election. So this is the very bad part of this identity crisis that we are living in this changing time. The other very good part is that people looking for references, they also look for new ways of creating, new ways of protecting, new ways of saying things out loud. So just, I wanted to make this connection first. And if you want, I will share my screen for the presentation that you all have is in Spanish, and I will try to follow up if this is okay for you. Great. So I have the presentation, so I can easily share. It's the one that I sent to yesterday. I'm really sorry. Here. Ah, no, está solo. Ah. Vale, perfecto. Vuelvo. Vale. Vale. Perfecto. Lo abro en Skype, lo envié. Sí. Voy a compartir pantalla. Fantastic. I'm really sorry. So let's go to the point. Well, first of all, Cristina already made a presentation about what has been the European Union focus on migration. We can say that for us, until 2015, when all the refugees started to come massively from Syria, until that moment, the European Union had been working really hiding under the radar and kind of forgetting about what was happening. So visibility was not really something that the European Union worked, and people, they knew about migration. It's true that there were many crises of la crisis de los cayucos in 2006. There were regular...
Arantxa,
Dime.
¿no tendrás unos auriculares? Igual
Sí.
se oye mejor.
Vale.
No, es que se oye un poco... Con auriculares probablemente no.
Ya está.
No, que estamos en familia, tía.
¿Ya se me escucha mejor? No.
A ver,
Ahora me
venga, tía, es que no pena.
no funciona.
Bueno, hoy... Nada, no te preocupes, que se entiendes. Se oye un poquito de ruido de fondo, pero yo creo que todos podemos hacer el esfuerzo de... No te preocupes.
¿Verdad? Qué mala suerte, de verdad, lo siento.
Nada, no pasa nada.
Intento seguir, de todas maneras, si hay preguntas y al final...
Sí,
pueden
nada,
escribir.
no te preocupes.
So,
Igual está esto peor.
just to make a little update related to what Cristina was explaining, on the 3rd of October 2013, there were 600 people who died in Lampedusa. Oh, there is a problem. There were 600 people who died in Lampedusa coming from Libya. After this, the Mare Nostrum operation that was Italy giving funds to their own ships to try to rescue people, which was, in fact, at that moment, after these 600 people dying publicly, and it was really something that was publicly known, Italy made an effort and put in place Mare Nostrum. Mare Nostrum worked very well. In the almost 2 years that it worked, it rescued more than 150,000 people. Mare Nostrum was an operation funded by Italy, which purpose was to rescue people. And this is important to underline. Mare Nostrum just ended in 2015, and after the end of Mare Nostrum, the European Union put in place an operation called Triton, which was funded by EU funds, but didn't have the goal of rescuing people, but just to protect the borders of the European Union. So this was the start of something very visible. The European Union was saying out loud, we don't really care about protection, we just put boats in the Mediterranean to protect our borders. So it's very important to underline that this Operación Triton, or Triton operation, that was a EU-funded team, their goal was not to protect, their goal was not to rescue, their goal was to protect European borders. After this, in April 2015, Triton showed that it was pretty useless because there were more than 1,000 dead people in 1 week in April 2015. It was something very shocking. We could see this on TV, and it was really a turn point in the story of the Mediterranean. So just after this, the European Union understood that stone was not useful anymore and put in place La Operación Sofía. Sofia had more money, but still their main goal was to protect the borders of the European Union. Under no circumstance they mentioned the protection of human rights or the rescue of people. Very important. So they put a lot more money in the Mediterranean. Nevertheless, they didn't change their own goal to protect the border. And this goes very well with what Cristina was explaining about the externalization of borders. 2nd of September 2015, and this is the turn point for our organization that didn't exist until that moment. On the 2nd of September, we can see on TVs the body of baby. He was a 3 or 4 years old baby, Aylan Kurdi, who was a Syrian refugee trying to get to the Greek coast. Then what happened in that moment? Our boss, who was a company owner, so Oscar Camps, who is the founder of Open Arms, is also an entrepreneur. So he had a save and rescue team for the beaches in Catalonia. So he was an entrepreneur, and he was sitting with his daughter on the sofa. And when they saw this picture of Aylan, the daughter, 10 years old, told him, "But Dad, you rescue people. Why don't you rescue these people?" And really, this was the beginning of Open Arms, because Oscar Camps said, "You're totally right. Let's go there." And so Oscar Camps decided to travel on his own with other 3 socorristas. He decided to go to Greece with nothing, just their savings, and they bought a little boat in Greece in order to help the government of Greece to rescue people. And this is how Open Arms was born in September 2015, from a very kind-hearted and very spontaneous action from a man that decided to go there on his own, without about an NGO, just because he wanted to live. So what happened at this moment? We arrived in September 2015, and we are the only NGO that professionalizes rescue. Till that moment, only the Greek boats were rescuing people in the sea between Turkey and Greece. There was nobody else. It's true that in the islands we had MSF and we have many NGOs who were there, but there was nobody in the sea. So what we wanted to show by doing this is that rescuing people is also part of protection. You need to be there. And there was nobody. So what happened is that Open Arms became the first NGO in the Mediterranean, the first rescue NGO. So after this came many others. Médecins Sans Frontières arrived. And there was Sea-Watch, Save the Children, that came after us, because we opened the way saying, "Hey guys, there are people dying on the shore. There's nobody to help them. It's fine when they arrive to Greece, there are other NGOs," and this was the truth. There were other NGOs. The problem is, let's help people not to die in between. And this is why Open Arms was born. For around 1 year, so during all 2016, Open Arms was free to do whatever they wanted. It's true that we rescued, in total we have rescued more than 60,000 people in these 3 years of life. And the government of Greece was very happy that we were, because they were pretty alone trying to save these migrants and people on the move trying to reach the Greek coast. So it was I don't know if to say like that, but it was a pleasant 2016. They allowed us to do what we wanted. It was very easy, just saving people from sea. There was nothing else. What happened is when the European Union signed the deal with Turkey in 2016, February 2016, or March, sorry, I don't remember, February or March, we could see that there was a total or almost total stop of refugees and migrants coming through Turkey. And what happened is that we stayed in Greece because the Greek government asked us to stay in Greece, but we also moved, and we moved to the central Mediterranean route, which is the one coming through Libya, going to Italy. This is the deadliest route in the world, the deadliest maritime route in the world. As Cristina was saying, taking apart that people die in the desert. But this is not the point right now. So in July 2016, we went with our boat to try to rescue people coming from Africa through Libya. Also very important to say, after the EU signed the deal with Turkey, many Syrian refugees, according to the 51 Geneva Convention, had to travel through all Egypt, going back to Libya to try to reach the European Union, risking their lives. And again, I insist, they are refugees according to an international declaration and treaty. So this is a clear threat to international law. Well, this is just a point. So during 2016, what Open Arms did was to rescue 60,000 people, also to put in place a system of protection by presence by the simple fact that Open Arms was in the Mediterranean. The Libyan authorities that had received money from the European Union, they were more careful about threatening the migrants' rights. This is a very important point, and this is what makes Open Arms, we think, a little bit different, because we do protection by presence in the sea, and this is important. We normally do protection by presence on the ground, and this is what UNHCR does, but we forgot that in the sea there are hundreds of people that are passing through, and there is nobody to see what's happening there. So Open Arms, I think, is the first NGO that does protection by presence in the sea. During that time, we also put in place something that I think is very new. We put the protection by, I would not know because I have it in Spanish, por difusión. What we did was visualize something that was totally hidden. The Mediterranean was a non-protection space where nobody said anything. So Open Arms was present in the Mediterranean and just pointed out something that was happening. And if people are dying and there's nobody to rescue them. Very important. So 2016, we worked pretty well to put we just put the spot the Mediterranean. People started really to react. In Spain, there were many moments where people were very effective in translating their feelings about how they felt on the Mediterranean. So it was a good year. Nevertheless, the European Union, at the end of December 2016, Financial Times just had access to a report made by Frontex, where they were accusing NGOs in the Mediterranean to be human smugglers and to be working with mafias to help them to reach Europe. This was in December 2016, so we can see that things were going wrong. suddenly the European Union didn't find our work so nice and started to put a little bit of pressure on us. And here comes the moment where they start criminalizing NGOs. So in March 2017, there's the signature of the deal between Libya and the European Union, and this is where things go very bad, and we could see a total change in the Mediterranean. So during from March 2017 until now, we have seen that the situation has got worse. They had stopped our boats. They have accused us of smugglers, and they made us no. Ya está. Sí, ya está. Vale, para acabar, sí. Well, you have all in presentation, so it's fine. But just to say that 2017 was a bad year because they started to put pressure on NGOs working in the Mediterranean. Many disappeared, and there was a moment where there was no NGO in the Mediterranean because we were stopped or we have left. 2018, so now we are at a moment where Italy and Malta have closed their borders for us. We cannot rescue people and go to Italy to leave these people in a safe place. So there's no way we can work like this. There are no countries wanting to accept rescue people, which goes against international law. The bigger question is not only the European Union through countries that are not allowing us to work, but not only are they going against human rights and the rights of migrants and people on the move, but they are also threatening those who want to fight for human rights and want to rescue people. So this is where I wanted to end. There is a double disprotection, the non-protection of people on the move, which is extremely worrisome, but there is also a disprotection of those really want to help those people. There is a double disprotection that really threatens the European Union's values, because where is solidarity? We were talking about solidarity, but solidarity in fact is not within, it's not within the European Union. It's let's push the problem outside of the European Union. So let's attack those who really want to help. So this will be, sorry, if you want, there are two videos. I would say that the best be the video that is called Cartas Mojadas, the Mission 39, if you can, just one, like this.
Eco 1 desde 2, cuando quieras empezamos. ¿Tienes? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. this moment we can move to slowly to your position.
Nos sentimos abandonados, no nos sentimos... tienen que haber barcos, tienen que ayudarnos, tenemos seres humanos a bordo en peligro de muerte y estamos a pocas horas de navegación de... O sea, estamos cerca de Europa.
Thank you so much, Arantxa, for your presentation. I think that even if we did not want it specifically, we have dealt with 3 dimensions, or 3 panels, three views. Firstly, the worldwide dimension or perspective given by Norah Niland, and then the European perspective, and we have descended to the real problems of an NGO working in the field, in this case in the sea, and with the problems of vulnerability within real and physical persons, I would say.